3 AI-written scary stories. Chapter 2. I was visited by a strange thing that I personally believe was a paranormal creature. It was about 3 years ago when I bought my first house. I am 27 years old and live in a 2-story home with a basement. The house is a bit old and had been pretty neglected. I was very excited about it and really wanted to find a good deal on a good home. I had been looking for a few months and found a few that I liked. This house was on a really nice street and was a decent price. I wanted to do some investigating to see if there was any paranormal activity there. I had seen many shows about the subject, but always thought they were very unlikely. After I moved in, I was getting my house set up and unpacking my things. The sun poured in through the windows and cast a cheerful light in the living room. As I bent down to reach for a box in the corner, something caught my eye. In the corner near the baseboard, a gray hand with long fingers and sharp claws reached up from underneath the floorboards and grasped at the floor. It was long and spidery, with slender fingers ending in claws made for scaling walls and ceilings. The palm of the hand was wrinkled and dusty like an old man's skin. It didn't seem to have a thumb, and instead had another finger on the side. I was paralyzed for a moment and watched as the arm slowly slid back under the floor. I immediately began to search online for information about what I had seen. There's some stories about hands reaching from beneath the floorboards to grab at people, but none were as specific as mine. I was never able to find any information that matched what I had seen. No one ever described it as being spidery or lacking a thumb. This seemed very unique. I mentioned it to my brother, who told me it sounded like a common nightmare. He thinks that I just fell asleep from the exhaustion. I agreed to some extent, but it felt different than my normal dreams. I think it was more real. Luckily, I have not had any paranormal encounters since that day.
Story 2. Once, as a child, I had an experience which no one else believed had happened to me. My family and I were camping at a lake in upstate New York. This secluded area had only trees and rocky ground. We pitched our tents on the shore and arranged our camp around it. The campground was dusty and empty except for our little family. A fire was built and everyone sat around it, talking and laughing and remembering past adventures at the lake. At nights my sister and I shared a tent and laid on the ground inside, in sleeping bags. One night, I woke up and looked around. My sister's shadow was visible. The campfire was still going, so I didn't think much of it at first, but the shadow looked like it was not moving like it should. I nudged my sister, whom I knew was awake but feigning sleep to avoid the conversation we'd been having about spirits and ghosts beforehand, to ask her why her shadow wasn't moving. Much to my surprise, she didn't budge. I jumped out of the sleeping bag and stared closer at the shadow by the light of the fire. It seemed to be moving, but I couldn't tell what was moving it. I asked my sister to get up and look by the light of the fire. Much to my surprise, she wasn't there. Her sleeping bag was empty. I looked around and there was no one else in the tent, and no one by the fire. I became frightened and called out for my parents, who were sleeping in a tent close by. They came and assured me that my sister was just in the bathroom and was fine. My parents thought I just had a nightmare, but I knew differently. I was still uncertain about it being a ghost, but I knew that somehow my sister was not in the tent when I woke up, but her shadow was. I have never spoken about this experience to anyone before, but it has always been in the back of my mind. I still think about that night often and wonder if it actually happened or not. I'm a firm believer in the paranormal. I have a keen interest in the subject, and I love to read about it, but I have never been able to find an explanation for what happened that night.
Story 3. I was in college in Albany, New York at the time. I was taking classes in the evening so I could work during the day. My job was in an office building about 4 blocks away from the college. I walked home every night after work because it was close enough to walk, and because I was trying to save money. The night in question I was practically running home due to the sudden downpour that had started, and was continuing to get worse. I was about halfway to my house when the rain let up for a few minutes. I stopped under an awning and watched as 2 shapes appeared next to me and mirrored my motions, staying under the awning as well. I didn't pay any attention to them at first. When the rain calmed a little, I moved towards the corner of the building that I was standing next to. The 2 shapes moved with me. One of them was taller than the other and slightly in front of the other one. I thought nothing of them and continued moving. As soon as I began moving, they both started moving away from me and gestured for me to come with them. I thought this was very odd and I stopped and stared at them. They continued gesturing and beckoning to me, and I became more and more agitated. I finally shouted, "Go away!" at them and they immediately vanished. I felt really weird after that. It was about an hour later when I walked in the door of my apartment. I was still quite shocked, but I was starting to calm down when I realized the apartment was very cold. I thought nothing of it at first until I saw that one window was wide open, yet the rest of the windows were closed. I quickly went to the window to close it. As I did this, I looked out to see if my friends were in the yard. I didn't see them, but I did see the same 2 shapes standing under the same awning that I had stood under. It was raining again, but they stood under it without moving their heads or looking around. They stared straight ahead at me. I quickly closed the window and looked again. They were gone. I checked the yard, but they were gone. I was really scared by this time, and I immediately grabbed the phone to call my college friends. They didn't answer. I went next door to my other friend's apartment to see if she was home. She was not, but something else was. A noise of some sort. I have no idea how to describe it. It sounded like a wah-wah noise, but with a sort of a chirp-chirp-chirp sound in between the wah-wah sounds. I walked towards the door and I saw a woman in a black dress standing right in front of the door with a needle in her hand. I ran as fast as I could back down the stairs to my apartment. I slammed it shut and locked it. That night I had something come into my room. It was very dark, so I can't be sure what it was. I do remember the shape of it. The only thing I could tell was that it was black and skinny, with a sort of a curve at the top. It started going towards the foot of my bed. I picked up a lamp and threw it at it. It went away. I stayed in bed for a while crying and shaking. I didn't sleep a single bit that night. I stayed awake in my bed shaking. I eventually fell asleep from sheer exhaustion. In the morning my friends came over. They came to my apartment to see why I didn't come to class. I told them what I had seen. They thought I was crazy. Even today they still think I am crazy. I don't blame them though.